Chapter 24 of The Boy Scouts Down in Dixie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Shasta, Oakland, California. The Boy Scouts Down in Dixie by Herbert Carter. Chapter 24. The Oasis in the Quaking Bog. Before they made any sort of a start upon what would probably be the last leg of their hunt, Thad believed it would be only a wise move if he and the sheriff had a little consultation with the man who was guiding them to where he believed the lair of the fugitive thief lay. Thad had always found that a good understanding in the start was more than half the battle. It often prevented serious complications from arising and mistakes being committed that were apt to prove fatal to success. Accordingly, he spoke to Alligator Smith along that line. "A little hold-up right here and now won't interfere with our hopes of success, will it, Tom Smith?" was the way he put it. "Reckon as how it ain't calkerlated to do the same, suh," came the reply, for the alligator skin collector had learned to have considerable respect for this thoughtful and resourceful lad who was serving as scoutmaster in the absence of Dr. Philander Hobbs, the real head of the troop. "Wait a little bit then, till I get the sheriff alongside," added Thad. "I think we ought to have an understanding, so there'll be no need of much whispering later on when it might upset our calculations to indulge that way." "Seems like you mout be correct thar, son," admitted the other readily, and possibly wondering how it was that this boy seemed to think of everything. The sheriff quickly joined them when he saw that something was in the wind. He, too, had been more or less impressed by the quiet sense of ability shown by this northern lad, who, while serving as a leader among his fellows, did not attempt any of the swagger that many lads could not help displaying. "Before we start off again, Mr. Sheriff, we ought to find out a little more of this business, it seems to me," Thad began, "and especially about the lay of the land, what sort of a shack this is, and how we'd better creep up on the same so as to take the man by surprise and at the same time not give him any chance to endanger the life of the little girl, because if he's the sort of rascal they say, he might be small enough to hold her up as a sort of shield from our guns and threaten all sorts of terrible things unless we went away and left him alone." "I've known that same to be done, sah," agreed the official, nodding his head as though he agreed with what Thad said. "And let me say that I understand just how you must feel about it. We've butted into this game, and it's only right and proper as how we ought to try and suit our purposes to yourn. So whatever you reckon on as agreeable, sah, you'll find us a-tryin' to meet up with you." Thad gave him a grateful look, for, truth to tell, it was the fear lest some unexpected and unprepared for peril threaten the girl before they could capture the desperate man that had been worrying him. He knew that doubtless among the members of this hastily summoned sheriff's posse, there must be a number of hotheads, men or boys, who were so bent on accomplishing something that would serve the ends of justice that, given half a chance, and they would spring forward, risking their lives recklessly in the hope of being selected by fate as the one to pull the rascal down. Many a brilliant plan, Thad knew, had been spoiled by just such well-meaning but thoughtless individuals, and he was trying to figure it out how the chances for having such a blunder occur might be greatly reduced, if not cut out altogether. In fact, he had it in his mind that since the posse now virtually controlled the avenue of escape from the island, it might be well for the guide and himself, say, to leave the others nearby and creeping along try to find out what Jasper might be doing. And deep down in his heart, Thad possibly was hoping that if this were undertaken, a glorious chance might arise whereby he could manage to get in communication with the girl and even stand by to protect her while Tom Smith went for the rest, or else even coax her to flee with him. The very thought gave Thad a thrill of strange delight now that the crisis was so very near, and he must soon learn the truth. He had great difficulty in repressing his eagerness and displaying his customary caution when his heart was urging him to more hasty action. "Why," said the swamp hunter as he screwed up his forehead in a way he had of doing when trying to cudgel his brains, as the saying is, "'bout all I remembers o' that shack, she were only made outen slabs and there like, and seems to me like they were a tier o' years, like as not make it look sick. But then maybe as how this here Jasper he done tote some more stuff across and patched that cabin up so hit'd shed water like." "Does it lie among the trees?" asked Thad. "It sure does, sah," replied the other. "How long would it take us to get there from here?" the boy went on to inquire. "If so be we started to walk regular like, we'd be there in 3 minutes, I done reckon," answered Tom Smith. "So close as that," muttered the sheriff. "I hope, then, none of my posse happens to let out a bark or a sneeze. Seems like that'd be heard if a fellow happened to be awake and listening like." On his part, Thad was more concerned about Bumpus than any of the others, because in the past on more occasions than one the fat scout had, as Giraffe expressed it, knocked the fat into the fire by some unexpected act, which explained in part why the scoutmaster was wild to accomplish something looking to the rescue of the little girl before any such accident could occur. Why it had come to such a pass among the scouts that if a fellow wanted to be very particular about some group picture he hoped to snap off, he kept his eye severely on Bumpus all the while, for if he could make sure that the clumsy member of the patrol were all right, he had little fear about the rest. Bumpus had ruined many a picture by some stumble or upheaval that was not gratifying to the artist. "I'm going to ask a favor of you, Mr. Sheriff," said Thad suddenly, as he leaned forward the better to speak in the other's ear. "Then spit her out, son," replied the officer, though he looked rather surprised and somewhat disappointed, just as if he suspected along what lines this request on the part of the scout might lie. "As I said before, this here is more your game than it is ourn, and I'm willin' to let you have the right of way." "Would you care very much if Tom Smith and myself crept on ahead to see how the ground lay?" asked Thad, determined to take advantage of the sheriff's kindness while the other was in a mood to accommodate him. The officer glanced toward the guide. "Would you think that to be a good play, Tom?" he asked. "Case if you do, I ain't got a word to say against the same. This youngster beats my time, and I'm right glad I run up against him. Never did have much use for Yankees since they run off my old man's slaves years and years ago, leaving the family po as church mice. But if they raise his breed up there, I've got to change my ideas, that's all. How about that move, Tom Smith? Be you of the same mind as him?" Now, possibly the guide had not up to then even considered such a move, but he was quick to see the wisdom of it, since Thad had brought the matter up. He was also too shrewd an old chap to disclose his ignorance, and accordingly he made out that he had himself been considering such benefits as might come to them from a spying expedition, but through a sense of modesty had refrained from mentioning it thus far. "Wanted to say something like that myself, Sheriff, but didn't know just how you might take it," he observed complacently. "But since Thad," he opened the IG, "sot me down as favorin' the same." "Oh, all right then, just as you figure, son," the sheriff went on to say, turning once more to the young scoutmaster. "But take us along as fur as you dar, Smith, and fix it with me so as how, if you need help sudden like, we'll know it's time to get busy." Thad felt almost like shaking the hand of the sheriff again and again, he was so delighted with the readiness with which the other had fallen in with his scheme. Under similar conditions there were many pig-headed officials so inflated with a sense of their own importance that nothing could have induced them to yield one atom of their authority in a case like this. They would have insisted on taking the lead and running things as they pleased, no matter if failure resulted through their recklessness. "We'll give a loud whistle if we get in any trouble and want you to rush up with the whole posse," he said quickly, fearing that unless he clinched the bargain immediately the sheriff might repent himself of having made it. "No need of telling you to be careful, son," continued the other, as Thad and the old swamp guide prepared to leave the party, "because I reckons as how you just couldn't be anything else if you tried. Yes, this here scout business has cotched my fancy right smart, and I 'spect to look into the same later on. Good luck, Thad, and here's wishin' she may turn out to be all you hopes for." That told the boy the sheriff had a good heart, even if his business was that of hunting desperate men, and his face had what would appear to be a hard look. None of the other scouts took occasion to say a single word, because they had not been asked to share in the consultation. But when they saw Thad and Alligator Smith preparing to move on ahead a short time later, leaving the rest of the posse in hiding, they could easily guess, all but Bumpus perhaps, as he afterwards got his information from Bob White in the lowest of whispers, what lured the pair forward. So they simply took it out in waving their hands to Thad when he turned his head to look back, as though in this mute fashion they might waft after him their very best wishes for success. After which the boys settled down to count the minutes, which would of course drag as though each one were weighted with lead, hoping that at any time they might hear the welcome coo-ee or whistle that had come to be known among them as a signal that their presence was needed in hot haste. And it need hardly be stated that every fellow belonging to the Silver Fox Patrol held himself in readiness to make the utmost speed in case such a call came from their leader. So the utmost silence reigned over that island oasis amidst the great Quaking bog. Now and then some bird would give utterance to a caw or a croak, but beyond this not a sound could be heard as they crouched there, wishing it would come to an end and something in the way of excitement follow. End of chapter 24.